Karen Etolis.
All right, so it is 10:02. Let's get it started. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday and almost Friday. And on this beautiful sunny day, and then we have a wonderful hot topic here. So welcome to the multidisciplinary approaches to end homelessness. And today's topic is developing affordable housing, a very, very, very much needed topic. So, and then I'm sure that people will be rolling in, and then if you just sign in, and then please put your name and organization in the chat box. And so just if you're new to this webinar series, and we push it out we push out the notification throughout the whole continuum of care, and then the recordings are also available on our website. So the purpose of these webinars are to provide an opportunity to engage our local regional experts on best practices, advocacy tools, and resources available to prevent and end homelessness in Riverside County. And then browse through our website, and then the webinars are all on it. So enjoy the YouTube videos there. And then so upcoming webinars, and we are currently still working on securing speakers for future topics. And if you would love to talk about a specific topic, feel free to email us, coc@rivco.org. And today we have our agenda is we have two speakers, and so one is from City of Corona, Karen Rober, Homeless Solutions Manager, and then at 10:30, and then we will have Mike Walsh from Housing Authority, the Deputy Director of the Riverside County Housing and Workforce Solutions. So, and then without further ado, and then I would like to hand the mic over to Karen, and Karen would be sharing us with the wonderful, amazing best practices.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to conduct this presentation. I feel honored there. I know so many of you that are on this webinar today are experts even better than me when it comes to all of the complexities of affordable housing financing. But what I hope to do is give you a local city perspective about how, through our homeless strategic plan, that we wanted to align resources to make sure that we were developing affordable housing that was going to help those that are not only at risk of homelessness, but also those that are chronically homeless and transitionally homeless. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. I wanted you to see all of our goals that we have, because we take a very comprehensive systems-oriented approach to addressing homelessness, and it's important that cities do this, that they don't look at just one piece of the continuum, but the whole entire system should be integrated. A lot of times cities will just focus on emergency shelter, but not look at how important it is to have doors to housing on the other side. And so you can see that I've highlighted goal number 3 for you. And to have a solid strategic plan, you want to look at not just permanent supportive housing, but multiple affordable housing solutions. So let's go to the next slide. Our strategic plan has very specific systems measures, and I wanted to point out some of those systems measures include how many permanent supportive housing units we're going to create, as well as how many affordable housing units that we are going to create. Let's go to the next slide. And when we look at measuring our strategic plan success, we also want to look at client measures that relate to affordable housing. And these are national measures that we even focus on through our continuum of care to judge how our system is performing. So if you look at how we're going to evaluate our system performance, housing placement and retention rates, as well as document-ready clients that are waiting for housing. And if you don't have doors to affordable housing on the other side of crisis stabilization, you're not going to have a high-performing systems-oriented solution. Let's move to the next slide. I hope my pace is going okay for you guys. I've had a little bit of Starbucks coffee this morning. So I just want to say I'm super excited, with respect to the strategic plan. Corona we're making huge success. That doesn't happen without partnerships. And I just want to give a shout out to our county partners who are on with us today, because clearly we couldn't have even made it this far without the partnership of the county and the continuum of care. So thank you all so much. All right, let's move to the next slide. So I want to talk about a unique thing that we did. When you think about a strategic plan, you want to think about how you align resources to successfully implement your plan. Sometimes it's not always about finding new funding or resources, but rather looking at the existing resources that you have and aligning them to the strategic plan. So these particular units are on 5th Street, and the city owns them. Go to the next slide and I'll give you the background on these units. So we purchased these, I think, around 2013. It's 12 units of housing. We used NSP funds, that's Neighborhood Stabilization Funds, so that tells you at the time that we did this, so it was under $1 million, $868,000. We purchased the units, and then we used home and NSP funds to rehab the units. And at the time, the city's priority was to hire an operator that would use these units for transitional housing, and that was the Corona Norco Rescue Mission. And then they made a strategic decision to discontinue services in the Corona Norco area, and these units came back to us. So let's move to the next slide. And they always say everything happens for a reason. So when the rescue mission discontinued their services in the city of Corona, it not only gave us back our city-owned homeless shelter, which was being used for higher functioning families, but it also gave us back these units that we are now managing. When our council adopted the strategic plan, they made a decision at my recommendation to repurpose these units for permanent supportive housing. And that is what is going to be happening. And so the operator RFP that we will be issuing for a whole system of services for the shelter and our different components of housing, these units will be part of that. So the nonprofit will manage them. We also have a local FQHC, federally qualified healthcare center in Corona that's going to be a partner at Centro Medico Community Clinic, and they have agreed to provide support services for eligible clients for these units. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So that was existing housing units that we repurposed from transitional to permanent supportive. Now I'm going to give you a picture of an exciting project that we're working on right now. I want to give a shout out to Mike Walsh and Marcus Cannon, who have been in conversations with the city of Corona and also with our developer. So I'm going to tell you about this. You can see in the slide, if you see where City Hall is, you can see the 91 freeway. The parcel is off of 2nd and Buena Vista. It's a 4.82 acre site. We purchased it from RCTC in 2019 for $2 million. We used CDBG funds and funding from our low-income housing fund from residual receipts and whatnot. And then in 2020, as the homeless solutions manager, I worked with our housing department. We worked together on RFP. I worked on the permanent supportive housing side that I incorporated into the RFP, and our housing department wrote the rest of the RFP. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So just in June, City Council approved our committee recommendation to select CNC development for this particular project. We're super excited about it. Hopefully, if all of the financing comes together, we should be able to have 110 units of affordable multifamily rental housing and 25 units of permanent supportive housing. And Mercy House is the nonprofit partner that will be assisting with the permanent supportive housing units. Let's move to the next slide. This is just a rendering from the developer's proposal, so you can kind of see what it looks like. And what's interesting, the design is similar to what City Hall looks like. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. This is an elevation if you're flying in a helicopter, so you can see where the permanent supportive housing is off to the left, and then the multifamily housing off to the right. You can see where 2nd Street is. So let's go to the next slide. This is another elevation, so you can see what the parking and the units and all of the amenities will look like. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I'm not going to go into major details about all of the complexities of the financing because I know that Mike is going to be covering that, but I just want to give you an example here. Mike and I talked about this project and we could almost view it as, what did you say, Mike, like a prototype? Because we're not sure how things are going to land, but this is what was in the developer's proposal. And as Mike can tell you, a lot of things can change from the time that the developer submits their proposal for how they're going to finance affordable housing to when they actually start applying for the different funding sources. So a lot of these funding sources are extremely highly competitive. It takes a lot of local resources to be able to have a project meet what's called a tiebreaker score to be eligible for a state or federal tax credit financing. So, you know, that to get those important financing resources, they will look to see that there's local investment from like the city and the county to really leverage those resources. And those local investments are critical to help those projects be competitive in these very fierce competitions for things like tax exempt bonds and tax credit financing. Also, you can see that the city of Corona is going to be assisting with this through land loan, impact fee deferrals, and development loans. And then I wanted you to take a look at the breakdown on the units. So we're pretty excited about this. You can see for the multifamily side of the project, 30% area median income, 50%, 60%, and 70% AMI. And the bulk of those units are within the 60% AMI level. And again, you need to have the right financing package in order to make sure that the project will cash flow at those income levels. So what the developer has proposed may change depending upon what's available at the time and the timing of when they submit applications for all of these different funding sources. It's truly remarkable when these units get in the ground because it's very difficult to cobble all of these resources together. So let's move on to the next slide. This is a picture of just the amenities for the permanent supportive housing units. We're pretty excited about what these units are going to feature. You can see the bedroom mix, 24 one-bedrooms, and then the two-bedroom on-site manager's unit. These are going to be beautiful units and, you know, integrated because they're next to the multifamily affordable housing units. And this particular strategy for Corona is critical to have permanent supportive housing units because we have a large number of long-term street homeless living with co-occurring diagnoses like mental illness, substance abuse, chronic health issues. And we know that nationally, permanent supportive housing is a successful evidence-based housing intervention. So we're super excited about the opportunity, not just for these units that will be coming, but the 12 units that I just mentioned to you that we already have. Let's move to the next slide. This is a picture of what the developer proposed for the permanent supportive housing sources of financing. You can see that they listed No Place Like Home funding, financing from the city of Corona, and tax credit financing. And just in talking to Mike Walsh and Marcus Cannon, some of these things are already probably going to be changing in terms of matching up. No Place Like Home probably would be 4% tax credits instead of 9%. And I think the county's available pot of No Place Like Home funding has been depleted, so it's competing for what's available at the state level. And Mike, I hope you'll correct me if I'm off target on anything that I'm explaining. So again, and the other thing too is for those of you that are listening in, for permanent supportive housing, a lot of times what developers will do is they will have a conversation with the local housing authority. I know CNC is doing that right now to cash flow permanent supportive housing, because you're serving people that are 30% and below of area median income, you need deep subsidies. So project-based vouchers that stay with the project can help to the project to cash flow. So our developer has been in discussions with the Housing Authority about that. They've also been in discussions with our wonderful behavioral health department with Marcus Cannon about the opportunity for supportive services. But this scenario that you see in front of you is a big moving target. A lot of things can change. So again, this is just what they proposed. You have to make sure you have a developer that is skilled in knowing how to bring these multiple financing resources together, because there are a lot of rules and regulations. For example, if you're successful in getting project-based vouchers, I believe if you have more than 8 project-based vouchers, you trigger prevailing wage. Is that right, Mike? Which could increase the construction costs anywhere from 25 to 30%. So that means you have to have more financing to pay for that additional cost for prevailing wage. So my recommendation to those of you that are thinking about this, if you're not an expert in this, is you have amazing partners at the county like Mike Walsh who know about this. And then when you hire a developer, you select a developer, if they're worth their salt, they know how to go after these financing sources. So it's really important to make sure that you have a developer that has a track record that shows that they are successful in competing for all of these different funding sources, because it is truly a tough competition for affordable housing. Let's move to the next slide. So last but not least, I just wanted to mention, because remember I was talking about, our strategic plan, it can't be a one size fits all. When you're looking at bricks and sticks trying to get housing in the ground, that development I just told you about, the 4.82 acres, that's probably 3 years away at least. So in the meantime, you need to get people housed. And so what we are doing is we are using our home dollars to provide tenant-based rental assistance so that we can provide immediate placements from crisis stabilization into housing. So for this fiscal year in our homeless action plan, we have $728,000 some odd dollars that will be used in tenant-based rental assistance. If you're not familiar with it, it's like a mini Section 8 program. It provides monthly rent assistance, just like the Section 8 program. You have to conduct housing quality standard inspections. The tenants need to qualify based on their incomes to Section 8. And the rents must meet payment standards, and we will align to the Housing Authority's payment standards for what are considered fair market rents. So we're excited about this. What I'm doing is linking these housing resources to our RFP so that when we have folks in crisis stabilization in our emergency shelter and our motel shelter program, there will be a quick path to housing. What's also exciting is when you have supportive service partners like Centro Medical Community Clinic or the county's behavioral health department, you could actually double TBRA housing as permanent supportive housing if you have supportive services that go with that housing. And we are going to plan to do that because we have a lot of folks that are going to need ongoing supportive services. And that is critical for just ongoing stabilization, housing retention, and quality of life. So my message in closing to all of you is that to truly address homelessness, you have to have affordable housing. And it should not be a one-size-fits-all model. You need multiple interventions. And that's what we're doing in the city of Corona, because we want to get as many people as housed as possible. I think that should be my last slide. If you can move to the next slide. Yes. So I'm hoping what we could do is I'll hand it off to Mike because I know he's going to go into a lot of details about the complexities of affordable housing financing and how you need to layer and structure. And he might even answer some questions that you have about what our developer proposed. So Natalis, I hope that's okay with you if we just go ahead and hand it off to Mike and then maybe take questions at the end.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, so I think it would flow better because, as you said, that because the city and the county work so closely together, and then after Mike's part, and then part of his presentation may be addressing some people's questions. So that's a good idea.
Thank you.
All right, so next we have Mike Walsh, and then talking about the strategies for affordable housing development. And go ahead, Mike.
And Mike Walsh, good morning. I hope I live up to all of the introduction that Karen has given me, and I hope the presentation works for you all. So we can move on to the next slide. And I wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of what the County Housing and Workforce Solution Department is currently working on through a number of different programs. And it goes a little bit to what Karen was talking about in terms of the full continuum of projects, from the 1,000 people we've helped through Project Roomkey, the supportive housing units that we're moving forward, rapid rehousing, but also in terms of the affordable housing production that the county is working with through the United Lift and keeping, I think that number is now over close to 10,000 people have now been helped with rental assistance through the United Lift rental assistance program. And then we have like more than, you can see the numbers in the slides can be shared with you all, close to 6,000, close to 7,000 units of affordable housing that is in some stage of production, whether that's under construction, pre-development, or that has been identified for a future affordable housing use. But also we see like that we try and on homeownership opportunities, whether partnering with groups like Habitat for Humanity or providing down payment assistance programs to groups to allow people to step into that next rung after they've gone from homelessness, gotten into an affordable housing project, become employed, get their credit in order, and work to transition them into a home ownership opportunity. You can go to the next slide. And this is takes a little bit a closer look at what we have. We have 9 projects of close to 850 units that are currently under construction. There are 6 projects that will be starting within the next 6 months, and then there's 27 projects that these are projects that have been entitled, have degrees of financing in place, commitments from the county or other sources that are just waiting from one of their other main sources. And then there we have 29 projects that these are sites that may just be raw ground like right now. They may be owned by a city. They're an idea, a glint in Tony Mize's eye of what a potential project potentially could be in the future. So we can go on to the next slide. So I really I use this example probably too much, like some of you may have seen me do these presentations, but I really see affordable housing finance as being a little bit of a stone soup. And for those of you that don't know the story of stone soup, there's a traveler that enters a village and he's hungry. And he goes and knocks on all the doors of all of the people in the town, and he asks them if they have any food. And they say, no, everyone turns him down, and says no food for you, no food for you. And then the traveler goes into the middle of the village and he rings a big bell, bong, bong, bong. And all the villagers come out and they wonder, why are you ringing the bell? We only rang that in the time of emergencies. And the traveler says well, there is an emergency. This town doesn't have any food. But I have a solution. Have you guys heard of stone soup? And everyone goes, what's stone soup? It's well, you first start with a big pot and you fill it up. You clean your stones and you fill it up with water, and then you cook it. Then it's ready to go. And so villager says, oh, I have a pot, and they bring the pot and they clean off the stones, and the traveler tries the soup and goes, oh, this is delicious. But if you really wanted the good soup, it would include carrots. And then the grocer says oh, I have carrots, and he goes gets carrots, and then he comes back, it's oh, this is good, but it would be even better if it had a little bit of meat. And the butcher goes forward and he gets like a ham hock or something and throws it in, and it continues and continues and continues until you have this great big soup that allows everyone to eat. And that's when we're looking at these affordable housing projects, that is like really what we're looking at, is like, how do we bring in a number of different people together, a number of different sources that make the full thing move forward. And we can go to the next slide and like highlight this. And this gives like a little bit of a picture. And these are just a small glimmer of what we have. Like on the left side, we have like the local housing resources that the county and cities may have. And then to the right, we have just a small glimmer of the state resources. And then there's federal resources and there's private resources. And then if we can jump to the next slide, like I put together like this little wheel of like how like all of these different things to come into that one affordable housing development. So you may see yourself in terms of on these places. You may be a supportive service provider. It's like, well, how do I get like help with affordable housing projects? Like, well, you could be engaged in providing the ongoing supportive services to that affordable housing development, because all of the affordable housing developments that get traditionally financed with state money require ongoing supportive services for a minimum of 15 years. So they need someone to do that work. And it's like, and then there's money within those developments to pay for it. And I'm not going to pocket watch everyone, but there is sometimes money to do that. So you could be engaging on that side to pay for those levels of services. The continuum of care, what role can the continuum of care play in these sort of things outside of the always being supportive of upcoming projects? There are resources that the continuum of care has, that whether that's HAP, whether that is other sources of money that they come in from the regular larger continuum of care pool that could be used as capital. And I say, like, we talk about rental assistance programs. If you were in a project and you said like you had $1 million and like you give that $1 million to an affordable housing developer, and I said like I want to set aside 10 units at permanently affordable at 30% of AMI. That $1 million, if you compare that to what you would be paying for the full life of that project, it's like close to, you would be giving that project close to $5.3 million. Because by that, like, it's just not, you're not providing any other assistance other than the capital to make that work, to allow that developer to go and leverage those other sources to make these sort of things work. And and then like local cities may say like, well, I don't have, since RDA went away, I don't have any money. It's like, I understand, I'm sympathetic. We can have a beer about it and talk about the glory days later. But I think how we can, but you do have other tools in your toolbox, like what's in your zoning code? Do you have any land that you may be able to contribute? Would you be open to doing fee waivers or other sort of fast tracking entitlements and what that looks like? And because if you just start with something, we have an idea over a site or a location, that allows you to then go and put all of these other pieces together. And the developer, like here, like the developer, the person is going to need the one to be the coordinator of all of these sort of things. You don't necessarily need, as Karen said, if you don't have to be the expert. There are affordable housing groups that do this all day, every day, that will pinpoint it together. And there, I see all these HCD different programs. All of them have different rules and regulations, and the key is like how you win. It's like anyone can apply, but the goal is like we don't do this for practice. We try and like, how do we win? So how we get more units into construction. And the other piece, like we talk about the need for subsidy vouchers, which is key. And I'm not going to say we don't, but there are instances where these developments, I would almost like a family. So like in my family, like there's like my wife Nadia, myself, my 2 little girls, and my sister-in-law who's living there that's out of work. My 2 little girls, they're not income generators at present. I try and get them to collect cans and those sort of things, but they're not really covering their weight at present. So they have like some time, but like until they can get a job. My sister-in-law, like she helps out with meals every so often, but she's also not like a net generator to the system right now. So like it's our own little permanent supportive housing project that we're working on right now. But Nadia and I are able to pay for the household expenses to make sure that the housing project is able to move forward. And the same thing is with the majority of these affordable housing projects. You have your 30% income, your really low income, extremely low income people. You have some that are maybe 40% income. You have some that at 50% income, 60% income. And so that allows the project to pay for all of the operating expenses, the supportive service expenses, and everything that allows to keep the lights on in that development. And so there's multiple, like I tell people all the time, there's 1,000 different ways to make these sort of things work. And like partnering with people, you can always come talk to us, to talk to other affordable housing developers, trying to figure out a way to make this work. And we can go on to the next slide. And Tony was already singing the praises of this development. I'm highlighting this one because it's the first No Place Like Home units in the state were completed here in Cathedral City with National Community Renaissance. And this was a rehab project that the National Corps had in their portfolio that was able to partner with behavioral health, the county, the city, and the state to bring in resources to take, it's not 100% permanent supportive housing, take 68 permanent supportive housing units there that working through and then allowing, and I would say like, if you look at tying to the earlier Project Room Key, the Project Room Key, we got people stabilized there, provide referrals over to National Corps and getting people into these units there. And I think the other piece that I can't sing the praises of National Corps and their Hope Through Housing Foundation, because as an entity, it's not just that they're the developer, but I mentioned the supportive services that they provide. As an organization, they have people on their team that are coordinating with the behavioral health staff, with our team at the Housing Authority, with the on-site property managers, to how do you mitigate things? Because we all know, like, some of our folks that we work with day in, day out, they're sometimes hard to love. And sometimes they're like difficult and like in these sort of situations. And there's reasons why they've become homeless over the years. And groups like National Corps, they try and find ways to partner with behavioral health, with other services, that how do we keep people in those units? And I think that's the other reason, the difference between a scattered site development where you're dealing with some mom and pop or even a large scale developer doesn't have those full wraparound services. That level of understanding is not always there, because it's not necessarily part of their general mission to provide this level of housing. And the mission of like groups like National Corps and others is to provide this type of housing. I think that's like really key, and why I would encourage folks to how do you partner in it. And I'm sure Tony's on. I'm not saying this just because it's Tony's on, but like he would be really willing to give tours and show people the quality work that's here. The next one on the list is I have Cedar Glen Apartments phases 1 and 2 is developed by Palm Communities, another great affordable housing developer here in Riverside County. They just completed the second phase and they just moved in 24 permanent supportive housing units into the second phase. But in the first phase, they had 15 permanent supportive housing units. And this is another partnership that was done in conjunction with behavioral health, the County of Riverside, the City of Riverside, and others, to get these units under construction. And this was, again, this was an idea for a project before the funding sources came in live. And then when the funding source came around, it's like, okay, well, there's this money at the state level that could provide up to 50% of the units as permanent supportive housing. And we presented that to Palm Communities, and Palm Communities like, well, we're interested, but we need vouchers to be matched with those permanent supportive housing units to get this No Place Like Home money. Otherwise, we're not going to be competitive. So then the Housing Authority stepped in on that front. This was ground that was already owned by the county. We entered into a long-term ground lease to make that work. And then so we put together all of those general pieces to get these units forward, but it wasn't necessarily, it was started because the project was entitled, it was land that the county had, and there was pieces that take advantage of the opportunities that are present. These are the funding sources we know of right now, but for those of us that have been doing this a long time, they change. We have to learn new acronyms and those sort of things relatively quickly, and new rules, and like, well, this is sort of looks like this other program that we used to be out there, but it's slightly different. But these are like how we can move forward and like create these other pieces. And then the last one on the list throw out to the next slide, please. Like Paris Family Apartments, and I maybe just be showing this one because this was a project I was a project manager on way back in the day, and like it's probably the best one that you've ever seen. But like I say this because it was only like it included 15 units of permanent supportive housing in here, and I highlight it mostly because there was no vouchers associated with those 15 units, and what was structured here was like, how do we bring in more 60% rents to balance out those pieces. Behavioral health was providing the ongoing supportive services to the project, but there are multiple different ways to get there. There's not a one size. It doesn't have to be new construction. It doesn't have to be rehab. It doesn't have to always have vouchers. There could a million different ways to do it. But what I would also like want to highlight in all of these three examples, the level of scale we're talking about. In order to really leverage these other large dollars at the state and federal level, you're looking at projects that are at least, different people have different numbers. I would say at least 50 units. Some people, you can get away with smaller projects there, but if you do smaller projects, we talk about that family and like the incomes, you become more dependent on vouchers because the operating expense, there's some fixed costs. I got property manager on site, whether you have 100 units or 50 units, you're still going to have that one property manager. So that ongoing operating expenses, you're not able to extend it out over as many units. And so you want to try and look at larger projects. And then also, I would say the integration of units, like 100% permanent supportive housing projects are great and critical, and we are supportive of them, but they're not the only way of making it work. Sometimes you can just have a portion of the units that are getting there to get to the same place. And I really like, I would like it's interesting, like for us in the affordable housing development world, that like we sometimes we speak like a different language than our friends on the homeless services side. And I like, maybe like you said, like a little glimpse into my, like it's like the story from the movie Fools Rush In, where they talk about Isabel Fuentes, like tells a story to her Wickman fiance about two squirrels that were like they were separated by a valley, and then on the north side of the valley they grew up to be, they looked a little different. They were fairer skinned, had bushier tails, and on the ones on the south side were a little meaner, prettier, darker fur, those sort of things. They may have been different in a lot of different ways, but they come from the same place. And I say like that for like the homeless service providers, the affordable housing developers, at some point in time in the history of funding, we became separated. That we're like different, but we're really all focusing on the same places. Like, how do we keep people housed, and how do we make sure that we're like utilizing the tools we have to make in the best interest? We may come from different places, we may speak a slightly different languages, but I think the more that we all come together in this stone soup sort of scenario and bring what we have to the table, we're able to produce better long-term results as a county and as people here. So that's all I have. Like, I think my phone number and email address, people can always reach out to me. My cell phone number is 951-202-5940. I give it out to you. If you abuse it, I'm gonna have to change, but like I'm happy to give it out to you guys. Send me a text or a phone call and see what we can do. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to y'all. And if I can be of any assistance in the future, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you both. That was a lot of information. Is there any questions?
Yeah, that is a lot of valuable information, and then like the reason why we put out these webinars is that like we don't want the knowledge to stop here. And then please take it home and then discuss with your team. And there will be more funding opportunities coming up. And I know that we're like with HAP, there was HAP 2 on the line, and then HAP 3 and HAP 4 are coming up. These are multi-year funding, and then so consider some capital projects, because it's good to have like the voucher programs. We need to have a wide range of offerings to address a wide range of needs in our community. So and then so think about these like the capital projects, and then think about the like the investment, the cash flow, and then so it really takes a whole big team to come together to make a project happen. And then so any questions and at this point?
Natalis, before we open it up for questions, I wanted to just throw this out there for those of you that are in the nonprofit community or are developers. You know, there's some cities that may not be where Corona and some other cities are in terms of affordable housing. And I think it's so helpful to try to work with the staff and the elected officials to educate them about the extreme value of affordable housing and to show them models that I think those of us that are familiar with affordable housing, we know that these units are almost always the most beautiful, nicest on the block, and that it will help cities to meet their regional housing and needs assessment or RHNA numbers, and that it can help them to address homelessness, and it can also help them to find doors of housing for people in their community that might be at different income levels. So it helps the economy. I mean, there's so many different benefits to affordable housing. And if any of you need some technical assistance just on key talking points and following up to bring cities along, let me know. I know Mike could also be very helpful with that. I mean, I think, you know, we're here to try to support you to build capacity throughout the region. That's really what the goal, even just, you know, myself as the vice chair and Greg as the chair of the continuum of care, we want to do what we can to build capacity. So if there's anything that we can do to help you with any of those educational pieces or talking points, please let us know through the staff.
And I see Brian Ambrose has a hand.
Sure. My question for Karen. Good morning, Karen.
Hey.
Can you describe some of the community input? How are you managing the community input? In other words, has the community been mostly behind you, or are you seeing some NIMBY types of approaches to what you're trying to do?
That's a great question. The thing that helped us to be successful throughout this process is when we were developing the strategic plan, which included those elements of housing that I mentioned to you, we had many different meetings over a 6-month period with many different stakeholders. We had meetings during the day, meetings at night, meetings on the weekend, online surveys, in-person surveys, follow-up focus groups, really trying to educate the community. And again, if you don't take just a fragmented approach where you're just talking about housing or you're just talking about shelter, but you show the integrated service delivery system and how it's going to improve the quality of life for businesses, for residents, for those that are low income and those that are homeless, you know, that education piece really helps to build support. So by the time our strategic plan went to City Council, we had overwhelming support with the different pieces that I'm mentioning to you. So I think that community education is important at all levels, and that included educating our City Council, our city departments, our county partners were with us, and even working with our neighboring cities. So if you invest in community engagement, it pays off. And, you know, to make people feel that their opinion is valued and that they have something to say about how we're all in this together. So I hope that helps.
It definitely does. Thanks.
And talking about, like, piggybacking on Karen's point about education and then educating upward, and then I know that Melanie is typically very quick on putting these the video and the PowerPoint slides, making them available on our website. And I would highly encourage everyone to use these materials and then to send the link to them, and then to present any part of it in your city council, in your nonprofit board members like meetings, and then take like a few minutes to look at certain slides, and then so see, like, just give them an idea, plant some seeds in their heads, and then hopefully, like, whatever reaction they comes up with, even if it's a little bit of jealousy, and then it's good to have some jealousies to motivate them, and then a little bit of healthy competition between cities is good too. Yeah. So, and then ultimately it's our clients that benefit from these housing projects. And then Greg has a hand.
Yeah, thank you, Natalis. I just wanted to add on to address Brian's question a little bit more. And Karen gave a great answer, and it is all about education. It's a lot about vernacular too, and there's a lot of people will use homeless housing, and it's not homeless housing, it's housing is what
Yeah.
it is. Additionally, it's making sure that leadership on both city councils, but planning commissions are well educated as well. Tony did an amazing job with the Cathedral Palms and educating all the elected players on what that redevelopment was going to be. Additionally, and Mike can attest to this too, when we were trying to do the Ivy Palms Home Key project in Palm Springs, you know, immediately everyone's like, it's a shelter, it's a shelter, it's a shelter, and it's not. And Mike and Heidi Marshall from the department did an amazing job of basically anticipating what questions were going to be brought up and gave a presentation before allowing people to voice concerns. So by the time we got to further questions or the typical NIMBYism, many of those had already been answered, and then support for the project happened. And then finally, I'll relay a recent Palm Desert Planning Commission meeting I attended on an affordable housing project. One of the most racist and classist NIMBYism I've ever experienced in my life. But what I will say is that the planning department, after their presentation and the applicant's presentation, was brilliant to have the city attorney come in and basically lay out what current law, because there's a lot of by right siting and development now. And so basically letting the individuals know before comments were made about this is really what's going to be required. Basically, it's, you know, extreme health and safety aspects to not to require. So it does come down to education, again, changing vernacular and really working with the partners as a whole.
Thank you very much, Greg. And this is a great point when it comes to marketing, and marketing is translated by words, and then what kind of terminology we use, and then depends on how the message is received. And then I understand that when we mention any word of homeless, and then there are always going to be a certain group of people who would be against it. But then I don't think pushing out the word affordable housing, I cannot think of any group who would say no to it. Yeah. So, and that I particularly like the slide that Karen put out, that it is not to address any one group. It is for people who are 30 AMI, 50% AMI, 70% AMI. So it is a whole range of people we are helping.
I would just like, not to be too contrarian, some of us have been like using like multiple different ways of saying whether it's affordable housing, workforce housing, permanent supportive housing. Like, it all, like, someone if they're not gonna like it, they're not gonna like it, and we have this the work on the front end. I wanted to expand on a question that was in the chat, like, and because I think it's something that comes up. Like, some groups may specialize in doing projects that for youth or transition age youth.
Yeah.
And so you're able, like, that's something that you, on the examples that were provided, you could, you would look at it on the front end and say, like, or talking with the developer as well as they're looking at the funding sources of saying, like, okay, we want to make sure that this project is targeted towards folks that are within this criteria. And then you would work back through that in order to, and this could be for a number of different things. If you wanted to focus on senior homelessness, or if you wanted to focus on or adult homelessness, or whatever HIV and AIDS population is, these are things that you would just need to focus on. in the front end of your design and working with the developer team to figuring how to make that work. And so Monique, like if you want to talk about it in more detail, please shoot me an email and I'm happy to expand on it.
Great, thank you, Mike. And then I see Eddie Estrada has a hand up.
Hello. Great presentation, by the way. My question is more related to, as a service provider and either partnering with a developer or trying to do something like this as a nonprofit agency, the struggle has always been enough operational to be able to deliver services on site. What strategies or words of wisdom can you give us service providers? Because we want to partner, but sometimes in our experience in partnering with developers with these type of projects, as a nonprofit, we end up not meeting the budgetary needs that we need or funds that we need to really be effective. And so it's an added burden sometimes on service providers to be able to raise the money to continue doing what we do best in these particular projects.
Well, I'll start and then Mike, you jump in. I think there's an extreme benefit if you're having those discussions on the front end so that the supportive services budget line item can be part of the financing because then it's a longer term sustainability opportunity as opposed to coming in once the units are already developed and then, trying to figure out how you're going to secure grants to be able to support the supportive services. So Mike, do you have something more to add to that?
Yeah, I would say like really, I would for everyone, I would say like know your worth and like what your actually true costs are. I think sometimes as nonprofits, there's like an undervaluing of like the cost, the true cost, because you think like, well, they're going to be upset if they turn it down. The one caveat to that I would say is this goes to the rules and regulations. Some state sources will only allow for so much money for supportive services to be paid out of the operating budget. And I think this would be an avenue where for the continuum and like a larger advocacy work for is talking with HCD and other sort of things like, well, can we, the $45,000 that you place as a cap or whatever the number is in the operating budget for supportive services is not enough to really provide the full wraparound services that you're asking us for. And so then it's a matter of like doing that advocacy. I think the other piece is if the developer, whomever is using the value of the services that you're providing and your expertise in that, like even if it can't be necessarily paid out of operations, can you enter into another sort of agreement with the developer to make sure that those full costs are being absorbed to that end? And I think the conversations with the developers will be on case-by-case basis, but I would make sure that you guys know what your true costs are and really hammer that out on the front end.
And Mike, just from a statewide perspective, I say this to Greg too, there is an elephant in the room that I think from a policy perspective, a bridge that we're going to have to cross, and that is long-term operating sustainability for supportive services, because some of the subsidies, whether it's if a project-based voucher only goes for 15 years, or like with MHSA, there was the COSERS operating subsidy. And so, when you talk to a lot of developers from a policy perspective, that is something we're going to have to be thinking about in the future. Do you have any comments about that, Mike, in terms of advocacy or, just something that we're going to have to deal with in the future? Because we want to be able to maintain those supportive services, and sometimes those subsidies end.
And Mike, if I could jump in here too, is, the supervisor who sat on the governor's homeless advisory task force, and all conversations turned to housing. But that was vocally expressed, Karen, and the governor's office gets it. Mike made reference to continued advocacy with HCD. I don't think you see in the governor's budget allocations in rounds 3 and 4, the ability for those operational costs. But to your point, Karen, that is something, and to yours, Eddie, too, is that there's got to be a sense of sustainability And in order for providers to want to step up and take that role, and I totally agree with Karen and Mike, and working on a huge project right now, is that I'm not so worried about the capital to build something. It's really how do we make sure there's a sustainability for those resources and making sure we're budgeting those up front.
And earlier, I see a hand from Eddie. Did you have a follow-up question based on this conversation? And then there's a hand from Tammy earlier.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's good to talk about the advocacy work to raise this cap, and it's about sustainability, long-term sustainability, to be able to do to deliver the services that we need to deliver, and to be we have individuals coming to step up saying, "Will you partner with us?" But we're a little leery because of these operational costs down the road. So I think advocacy is going to be a big task that I think we have to do. And then the other piece to Karen is, and Mike, know our worth, and just put it up front. This is our costs and this is our need. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the feedback.
Great, thank you. And Tammy, did I see you putting up a hand earlier?
Tammy, you're muted.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you to Karen and to Mike both for really informative presentations. And I wanted to just mention to Mike specifically, well, everyone actually, I appreciated you bringing up habitat in the beginning of your presentation, and also the home ownership side. And I just want to say, on the bigger picture, I think it's always important that we remember that we have to have an exit strategy for people that are in long-term subsidized rental, because what happens is that they creatively, as anyone would, figure out ways to stay there, because the bridge from a subsidized to fair market rental or home ownership is just too broad. And so I really support the good work you're doing, Mike, with the county, and I know you're supporting several of our projects, but home ownership should be considered as you mentioned, on the continuum, because it's a critical part. One of the last houses we did in Elsinore, there were 60 individuals that applied for one house, and the majority of them, I think it was 90%, were on subsidized rental. And so I think that needs to be part of the conversation. Unfortunately, none of the funding ever goes to self-help housing developers unless it's separate pots of money like NSP. And so I just appreciate you bringing that up, and I applaud all the great work that's going on at the county right now. And thank you both for the presentations.
Tammy, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's something to be said about the whole moving on initiative, and there are different philosophies if you ask different developers and their supportive service partners. But I do think that there should be room for that, because once folks are stabilized, even if they're living with a mental illness, if they're at the point of stability where they don't necessarily need those ongoing supportive services and can move to the next phase of housing, then that's going to free up a unit for others that need the supportive services. So I'm with you on that in terms of what we can do to beef up those initiatives.
Yeah, we're actually we're in the midst of a study with Cal State San Marcos, trying to dissect this component of my argument a little bit more and be able to provide some data points that really illustrate really illustrate what's happening. Because on the habitat side, we're able to do small projects because of the funding available, and 5 or 6 units at a time is great, but it's not enough. And so I just appreciate it being a little bit of the conversation today. So I won't take up any more time, but thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it's something that's being looked at as like from an equity perspective. You're seeing a lot of large banks like in other sort of pieces. I also look, the federal government has a program through the rural side, the USDA Rural Development Self-Help Program. And I look at like a city like Coachella, who was rural up until the 2020 census, has a 70% home ownership rate within that city because of the number of USDA 502 loans that were made within that jurisdiction. And in that, if you post the no Coachella, it has basically very similar demographics of median income as a community such as Hemet, but nowhere close in terms of the home ownership rate. And so how do we look at developing programs that are really scalable for, like, because I know the good work that Habitat for Humanity does, but how do you do more than 5 in a subdivision? Because at 5 homes, you're not able to get pricing scale, you're not able to get any sort of cost efficiency level of scale. How are you pushing out to those other sort of options? But also, I think more broadly, for us to look at, are there other types of ownership options or other sort of housing options that can help to fill in these levels of gaps, and using this as an opportunity for the collective creativity of this group and other groups to come up with those solutions. So the more you think about it, Tammy, please don't hesitate to reach out. We can have further discussion.
And I just, from an educational perspective, I'm so glad that Tammy brought that up, because I think, we get back to all things, there should be balance. It should not be a one size fits all. I think we've seen some cities where they only want to do senior housing, because that seems to be senior affordable housing, the least controversial, or they may only want to focus on home ownership programs, or then, so looking at, if you want to have a healthy community, you need to have the full spectrum. And that doesn't mean that you need to have the resources to get it done all at once. It's an incremental process over time. So,
yeah. And just one last super quick point. At the end of the day, for me, what it all boils down to is just giving people a sense of hope. And we are not giving people their dignity and the ability to self-sustain by keeping them in subsidized rental long-term. A small percentage, most of them, that's a viable option and the right path, but some of them could go on to something better, and giving that sense of hope by providing a pathway, I think is where we need to go. But thank you. Sorry for that.
Tam, you're right on. Can I expand on something Mike said too? Is we need to look at our product type as well. To your point, Tammy, is many of these individuals, they don't need a 1,500 to 2,500 square foot home on an 8,000 square foot lot. So we need to start looking at, people use the word tiny homes, and I don't mean that in a trailer type or homeless village, but really looking at 800 to 900 square foot homes that are not subsidized, that people can get into at a relatively cheaper cost.
agreed.
All right, thank you all for all these wonderful conversations and discussions. And then I'm sure that if we had more time, and then we certainly can make use of the time to have more continue this vibrant discussion. So, and then so for the sake of time, we are about 4 minutes over. And then please don't let these conversations stop here, and continue it at your local level. Use our materials on the website. And with that said, and also the contact information are contained in the PowerPoint slides, and that will be available on the website. So we with that, and then we would like to thank everyone for participating today. And then the next webinar will be on domestic violence program on August the 12th at 10 a.m. And look out for the notification. Thank you so much.
Hey, Mike, it was fun presenting with you, dude.
As Isabel, great job, Karen. Bye all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Mike.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.